Hello, my name is Nora, and I feel like I'm walking a tightrope in my family. My mother, my older brother Anthony, and his wife really live with me. We may appear to be a normal family on the outside, but on the inside, there is conflict and underlying animosity. With an expensive degree and a lucrative career, Anthony is the golden boy and the pride of our family. Riley, his ever-poised wife, is a master at her job. She constantly manages to look encouraging while subtly escalating the conflict. I'm the one who stays at home in the interim, handling everything from paying the bills to making sure our mother is comfortable. However, my efforts are frequently ignored. I've lived with my mother for years, and she's not shy about her fondness for Anthony. She once said, "Living with your brother and Riley seems better for me," which struck a deeper chord than she was aware of. It appears that I will always be the family's underappreciated member, regardless of how much I offer emotionally or monetarily. But if I've learned anything, it's that hardship is a source of strength. Despite the difficulties in my experience, I am confident that I am more capable than they realize. When my father became very ill during my second year of college, my life took a sudden change. He needed ongoing care, and it soon became apparent that my mother, who was not good at taking care of the house, couldn't do it by herself. Although caregivers were employed, they were unable to meet all of the needs, so I had to fill in as necessary. In order to make sure my father was comfortable and had all he needed, I frequently had to dash between classes and home. It was difficult to juggle my education and caregiving, but I couldn't let him suffer. During one of these difficult days, I had the following thought: how would I take care of my father after I graduated and began working? I looked at other options because of the uncertainty. I took the ideas I was learning in my economics lectures and started researching online business strategies. Soon after, I formed a partnership with friends who were IT and management experts, and we started a tiny internet company. In order to be close to my father, I decided to work remotely from home, while the majority of our team worked from an office. I began making a substantial financial contribution to our household as the firm gradually gained traction. My father saw how committed I was, and one day he smiled proudly at me as I assisted him with his prescriptions. The words, "Nora, you've sacrificed so much for this family," he remarked quietly. "You've developed into a responsible, diligent lady. You have my admiration." I was so moved by his words that I started crying. His remarks made every sleepless night and tense day worthwhile, even if it wasn't often that my efforts were recognized. Despite the challenges, my decision to shift my career plans and start an online business allowed me to support my family in ways I never thought possible. It wasn't the path I initially envisioned, but it became a journey of resilience and growth. Even though my contributions often went unnoticed by others, my father's recognition reminded me that my sacrifices weren't in vain. My brother Anthony has always been the family's pride and joy. With his sharp intellect and determination, he graduated from a top-tier university and quickly landed a prestigious job. His success seemed to put him on a pedestal, and my mother never missed an opportunity to remind me of it. While I stayed home juggling caregiving and building my online business, Anthony was out living his dream in the city, detached from the realities of our family life. Shortly after securing his job, Anthony distanced himself from us entirely. He stopped answering our calls, ignored our messages, and acted as if we no longer existed. It was as if he had cut all ties, leaving my father and me confused and hurt. My father had supported Anthony financially through his education, ensuring he had everything he needed to succeed, yet Anthony showed no gratitude. His silence was a heavy blow, especially when my father's health was deteriorating and we needed all the support we could get. Then, out of the blue, Anthony reached out after years of no contact. His sudden call took us by surprise, but it wasn't a warm reconnection. Instead, he called to ask for $99,000 as a wedding gift. His demand was as shocking as it was audacious. My mother, ever the doting parent, seemed hesitant but willing to consider it. She justified his request, saying, "It's a parent's duty to help their children start a new life." Her words angered my father, who had been silently listening. "Why should we give him anything?" my father asked, his voice trembling with both frustration and sadness. "He abandoned us, never once checked in, and now he expects us to fund his wedding." My father's disappointment was palpable. He had always been proud of Anthony's achievements, but this blatant disregard for family shattered that pride. My mother tried to defend Anthony, insisting that helping him would strengthen family bonds, but my father wasn't having it. "Nora has been here every day supporting this family while Anthony vanished without a word, and now he wants money. He doesn't deserve a single penny," he said firmly, his voice usually calm, but filled with hurt and anger. The argument left the household tense. My father's disappointment in Anthony was undeniable, and for the first time he openly acknowledged the sacrifices I had made for the family. Anthony's selfish behavior had not only hurt our father, but also exposed the fragile dynamic within our family. It was clear that his priorities lay elsewhere, and his actions left a lasting scar on our already strained relationships. My father's passing was as sudden as it was heartbreaking. One morning, I went to check on him only to find him unresponsive. Panic surged through me as I called an ambulance, but it was too late. He was gone. The man who had been my rock, my confidant, and the only one who truly saw my worth was no longer with us. His death left a void that words could never fill, but I knew I had to stay strong to give him a proper farewell. As the funeral arrangements began, I quickly realized I was on my own. My mother, who should have been taking charge, seemed detached. Instead of mourning, she spent her time on her phone, scrolling through social media as if nothing had happened. "You handle it, Nora. I'm too overwhelmed," she said casually, leaving me to carry the emotional and logistical burden. Her indifference stung, but I pushed forward, determined to honor my father's memory. The day of the funeral arrived, and with it came an unwelcome surprise. Anthony showed up with his wife, Riley, both of them dressed inappropriately for the somber occasion. While others came to pay their respects, Anthony strutted around casually, his presence turning heads for all the wrong reasons. Riley's flashy attire and smug demeanor only added to the discomfort. My mother, however, greeted them with a warm smile as if nothing were amiss. "I'm glad you're here, Anthony," she said, her voice unusually cheerful given the circumstances. Then, to my shock, she added, "Now we can discuss your father's inheritance." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Guests who had come to mourn were now witnesses to an unfolding family drama. Anthony, not one to miss an opportunity, spoke loudly. "Honestly, I don't think Nora should expect anything. She's been living off Dad all this time," he said. His words dripped with sarcasm, and I could feel the heat of everyone's eyes on me. I clenched my fists but remained silent, not wanting to ruin the day meant to honor my father. My mother, seemingly oblivious to the inappropriateness of the moment, chimed in, "Your father's assets belong to the family, and as his eldest son, Anthony deserves the most." It was hard to believe this conversation was happening at a funeral. My father had worked hard to provide for us, and now his legacy was being reduced to a petty argument over money. I looked at the guests, their faces etched with shock and discomfort. Some whispered among themselves, unable to comprehend the blatant disrespect for the occasion. Anthony, emboldened by my mother's support, turned to me and said, "You've been a burden, Nora. It's only fair that I get what's rightfully mine." His wife nodded in agreement, her smirk as irritating as ever. I took a deep breath, holding back the urge to lash out. "This isn't the time or place for this discussion," I said firmly, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. "We're here to honor Dad, not argue about inheritance." Anthony scoffed but said nothing further. My mother, however, looked visibly irritated, as if I had disrupted her plans. After a few more tense moments, Anthony leaned toward my mother and whispered something before the two of them, along with Riley, left the funeral early, leaving me to finish what they had so carelessly disrupted. As I stood by my father's casket, I couldn't help but feel a mix of sorrow and anger. Sorrow for losing the one person who truly cared for me, and anger at the selfishness that had overshadowed his final farewell. It was clear that my family had fractured beyond repair, and I was left to pick up the pieces on my own. But if there was one thing I learned from my father, it was resilience, and I intended to honor his memory by moving forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead. The inheritance dispute began the moment Anthony decided to assert his so-called rights as the eldest son. After the funeral, he made his claim loud and clear. "This house belongs to me," he declared, standing in the living room as if he already owned the place. "As Dad's eldest son, it's my birthright, right?" His wife, Riley, stood beside him, nodding in agreement with her usual smug expression. My mother, sitting on the couch, looked on silently, her lack of objection speaking volumes. I took a deep breath, my emotions simmering just below the surface. For years I had been the one to shoulder the financial burden of this household, taking care of my father when no one else would. Yet here was Anthony, who had been absent for years, now understanding what he believed was his due. His audacity was almost laughable if it weren't so infuriating. "Anthony," I said, my voice calm but firm, "this house doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to Mom either. Legally, it's mine." The room fell silent. Anthony's smug demeanor faltered, and for a moment, even Riley looked taken aback. "What are you talking about?" Anthony finally asked, his tone dripping with disbelief. "I'm talking about the fact that Dad entrusted this house to me before he passed," I replied, holding my ground. "He transferred ownership to my name because he knew I was the one taking care of him and supporting this family." Anthony's face turned red with anger. "That's impossible. Why would he do that? You don't even have a real job. You've just been freeloading here." I felt my hands tremble but refused to let his words get to me. "Freeloading," I shot back, my voice rising slightly. "Do you have any idea how much money I've poured into this house while you were off living your life in the city? I was here making sure Dad got the care he needed, paying bills, and keeping this house running." I glanced at my mother, hoping for even a hint of acknowledgement, but she avoided my gaze. Her silence stung more than Anthony's accusations. It was as if all the sacrifices I had made meant nothing to her. "Let me remind you," I continued, my voice steady again. "Dad's savings ran out long ago thanks to Mom's spending habits. After that, I started giving $3,000 a month to support the household. Dad knew I was the only one who could be relied on, which is why he made sure the house would stay in my name." A flashback played in my mind as I spoke. I remembered the day my father told me about the transfer. "Nora," he had said, his voice weak but resolute, "I want to make sure you're secure. You've done so much for this family, and I trust you to do what's right." Those words had given me strength then, and they gave me strength now. Anthony, however, wasn't ready to back down. "This isn't fair," he shouted. "I'm the eldest son. I deserve this house. What kind of family betrays their own blood like this?" I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. Betrayal echoed through me. "You abandoned us for years, Anthony. You didn't even bother to check on Dad when he was sick. The only betrayal here is your sudden return, thinking you can take what isn't yours." Riley, clearly uncomfortable, tugged at Anthony's arm, whispering something I couldn't hear. My mother, finally breaking her silence, spoke in a low, defensive tone. "Nora, maybe we should share the house. It's what your father would have wanted." I shook my head firmly. "No. Mom, Dad wanted me to have this house because he trusted me. You and Anthony have shown nothing but selfishness, and I won't let you take advantage of me any longer." Their betrayal had deepened my resolve. This house wasn't just a property. It was a symbol of my father's trust and my years of sacrifice. I wasn't about to let it fall into the hands of those who only remembered family when it was convenient for them. For the first time in years, I felt truly empowered, ready to break free from their toxic hold and build a life on my own terms. The time had come to break free. After years of sacrifice and unacknowledged contributions, I made a decision that would change everything. I was leaving. Standing in the living room of the house that held so many painful memories, I faced my mother, Anthony, and Riley. Their faces were a mix of shock and disbelief as I announced my decision. "I've had enough," I said firmly. "I've supported this family for years, and all I've received in return is disrespect and betrayal. I'm done. I'm leaving this house, and I'm cutting all ties with you." Anthony scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Where will you even go, Nora? You've always been stuck here, playing the martyr." I met his gaze without flinching. "That's where you're wrong. I've been planning this for a long time. I'm selling the house and moving abroad. I have no intention of staying here surrounded by people who only see me as a burden." My mother's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't sell this house. It's been in our family for years." "It hasn't been our house for a long time," I replied coldly. "It became mine when Dad transferred ownership to me. He trusted me to take care of it, and now I'm making the decision to let it go." The room fell silent, but I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. Anthony and Riley exchanged glances, and my mother looked as though she wanted to argue, but couldn't find the words. That evening, I began packing my things. As I folded clothes and boxed up memories, a flood of emotions washed over me. I thought about the countless times I had stayed up late, balancing caregiving and my studies, only to be met with indifference. I remembered my father's words of encouragement, the rare moments of validation that kept me going, and I thought about the countless ways my mother and Anthony had taken me for granted. Their selfishness cut deeper with each passing year. But alongside the bitterness, there was a growing sense of relief. By leaving, I was reclaiming my life, a life that had been overshadowed by their demands and expectations. For the first time, I felt a spark of hope for a future that was mine to shape. I finalized the sale of the house through my uncle, who had always been a source of quiet support. He understood my reasons and assured me he'd handle everything. Once the sale was complete, I booked a one-way ticket to a tropical destination I had always dreamed of. It was my chance to start over, far away from the toxic environment I had endured for so long. As I locked the door for the last time, I felt a strange mix of sadness and liberation. The house had been a symbol of both my struggles and my growth, but it no longer defined me. Walking away, I left behind not just bricks and mortar, but the weight of a family that had never truly valued me. This was my new beginning, and I intended to make the most of it. With the weight of my old life behind me, I boarded a plane to a tropical country that had always been a distant dream. The warm sun, gentle breeze, and vibrant landscapes greeted me with a sense of promise. This was my fresh start, a place where I could finally live for myself, free from the burdens and expectations of my family. The first few weeks were an adjustment. I rented a small apartment near the beach with large windows that let in the sound of the waves. Mornings began with fresh fruit and coffee on the balcony, watching the sunrise over the ocean. It was a far cry from the tense atmosphere of my old home. Here, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Establishing a routine helped me settle into my new life. I spent my days working on my online business, which provided the financial freedom I needed to make this move. Afternoons were for exploring local markets, trying exotic foods, and meeting people from all walks of life. The locals were warm and welcoming, their laid-back attitude reminding me of the importance of slowing down and appreciating life's simple pleasures. One evening, as I walked along the shoreline, the golden hues of the setting sun reflecting on the water, I found myself reflecting on my journey. The pain of my family's mistreatment still lingered, but it no longer defined me. I had learned valuable lessons through those struggles, lessons about resilience, self-worth, and the importance of setting boundaries. For years, I had sacrificed my own dreams to support a family that never truly appreciated me. but those sacrifices had shaped me into someone strong and independent. My father's trust in me, though a small flicker of light in the darkness, had been a turning point. It reminded me of my worth and gave me the courage to break free. Now I was embracing my independence, carving out a life where I was in control. The challenges I faced had taught me to prioritize my own happiness and to surround myself with people who valued and respected me. The future was no longer a source of anxiety, but one of excitement and endless possibilities. As I stood on the beach, watching the waves wash over the shore, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for the strength I had found, for the opportunities ahead, and for this beautiful new chapter. Life had tested me, but I had come out stronger, ready to embrace the freedom and joy that I had always deserved. This was my new beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. Back in my old life, my family's downfall was inevitable. Anthony Riley and my mother had always lived beyond their means, and without me to quietly fill the financial gaps, their recklessness caught up with them. News trickled in through my uncle, who kept a distant but watchful eye on them after I left. It didn't take long for their lavish lifestyle to collapse under the weight of their mounting debts. Anthony and Riley had moved into a small, cramped apartment in the city after being evicted from the house I sold. Their savings quickly dwindled, leaving them to juggle part-time jobs just to keep up with basic expenses. Meanwhile, my mother, who had always enjoyed her outings and indulgent shopping sprees, found herself struggling to adjust to a much more frugal lifestyle. Debt collectors began showing up at their door, their calls relentless and threatening. The life they had built on illusion and entitlement was crumbling. They borrowed money from risky lenders, hoping to stay afloat, but that only worsened their situation. Each bad decision dragged them deeper into a financial hole, and their relationships with one another grew increasingly strained. The once proud family that had dismissed my contributions was now barely holding itself together. As for me, I felt no desire to return to that toxic environment. My uncle occasionally updated me, his tone tinged with quiet disapproval of their actions, but I kept my distance. I had made the conscious choice to prioritize my happiness and build a life of my own. The struggles they now faced were of their own making, and I had no intention of being pulled back into their chaos. I often reflected on the irony of it all. The same people who had mocked me for staying home and working quietly were now the ones scrambling to survive. It wasn't schadenfreude that I felt, but a bittersweet sense of closure. I had offered them my support for years, only to be met with indifference and betrayal. Now I was free, living a life filled with peace and purpose, while they faced the consequences of their choices. Walking along the shoreline of my new home, I felt a profound sense of contentment. My journey had been fraught with challenges, but it had led me to a place of strength and independence. I had no regrets. My family's downfall was their own doing, and I was finally at peace, focused on my happiness and the brighter days ahead.